South Korea just broke a global record that honestly they probably didn't want to break. We just got data that shows that the country's fertility rate dropped to 0.78 in 2022, which is below the previous record low of 0.81 set the year before by none other than South Korea. So yes, the country just broke its own record. And in case you're not familiar with the term, the fertility rate is the average number of children that a woman is expected to have in her lifetime based on birth rates in a given year. In other words, the typical woman of childbearing age in South Korea today is expected to have either one child or no children. Such a low fertility rate could have dramatic consequences for the country's population. You see, just to keep its population stable, South Korea's fertility rate needs to be at least 2.1. That's called the replacement rate because that's enough children to replace the parents and account for a certain small number of children who don't survive into adulthood. Now, if you go way back in the day, almost every country had really high fertility rates. 5 to 7 children was pretty typical. But as countries modernized and became richer, women had fewer and fewer kids. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it essentially boils down to women having more education and more employment opportunities, combined with the fact that it's become more expensive to raise kids. So in developed countries, fertility rates have trended down towards the replacement level over time. And in some countries, they've even fallen below the replacement level, like in much of Europe and East Asia. In fact, today, nearly half of the world's population lives in countries where fertility rates are below the replacement level. This is significant because unless a country has immigration to offset it, a fertility rate that's below the replacement level will eventually lead to a declining population. And that's exactly what we've seen in countries like Italy, Japan, China, and many others. Now, for a country to have a fertility rate that's just slightly below the replacement level is one thing. In that case, the population will decline slowly. But it's a completely different thing to have a fertility rate that's way below the replacement level like South Korea has. In that case, you could see a population collapse. And if you look at the projections for South Korea's population, that's essentially what could happen. By the end of the century, the number of people in the country is expected to fall by half. So on the surface, a declining population, no matter how large it is, might not seem like a big deal. But there's potentially some major issues that come with that. The biggest one is the impact on the workforce, the economy, and social programs. As South Korean women have fewer children, that's eventually going to lead to fewer working age people in the country. As you can see from this chart, the number of people in South Korea aged 25 to 64 and under the age of 25 are expected to fall by 2/3 by the end of the century. Fewer workers means that the size of the South Korean economy will be smaller than it otherwise would be. A smaller workforce isn't necessarily a negative for people's standard of living in and of itself. There's a lot of small, rich countries in the world that are doing just fine. But you gotta remember that South Korea is an export-reliant economy. If those industries can't find the workers they need, that could hurt their competitiveness, and by extension, the broader South Korean economy could be hurt as well. To me, though, the bigger issue is one related to age structure. What I mean by that is as its population declines, South Korea is going to have fewer working age people relative to older non-working people. You can see that the number of people aged 65 and older is expected to more than double over the next 3 decades. That means there's going to be fewer working age people available to support a growing population of elderly people. And as a result, South Korea's social welfare programs could be strained. In January, South Korea's National Pension Service forecast that the country's main retirement fund would run out of money by 2055. To fill that gap, the government might have to borrow money, increasing the debt of the nation. So these are the reasons why the South Korean government is trying to get people in the country to have more children. South Korea's president recently called the country's low fertility rate a, quote, national calamity. And his administration has provided incentives for families to have more children. The government's offering a monthly allowance of 1 million Korean won or $770 to parents with babies up to 12 months old. So far, it hasn't worked. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. People who follow these trends closely point to a complex web of cultural and economic forces that are keeping South Korean women from having more children. One factor is the high cost of raising kids. South Koreans spend an average of 6 years of wages per child on education-related costs. Housing costs are astronomical as well. Korean home prices recently reached 18 times the average annual income, which is up from 10 times a decade ago. There's also pressure from employers to work long, grueling hours with limited time off, even to take care of babies. At the same time, childcare services are difficult to find and extremely expensive. All this has made it increasingly unappealing for South Koreans, and particularly South Korean women who do most of the work in raising children, children to have kids. So we'll see what happens. Maybe some of these cultural and economic norms will change, or maybe the government will be successful in incentivizing families to have more children. Or maybe not. Another option is to increase the workforce by allowing more immigration. Over the past couple of decades, South Korea has relaxed its immigration policies and allowed more foreigners into the country. But immigration is a controversial topic in the country, and South Korea's population remains largely homogenous. Another option is to use technology and automation to replace the workers that are going to be lost because of population decline. As you know, we're seeing some really big technological changes happening today, so maybe a declining population won't be so much of an issue in the future thanks to technology. Along with South Korea, other countries like Japan, Singapore, and Germany are facing similar issues, so this is going to be an interesting area to watch. Hope that helps, and follow for more insights on the economy and investing.